My name is Calhoun Morris, 32 years old, and I never thought I would discover my parents' biggest secret on a random Tuesday evening by the Jefferson River. I was supposed to be fishing with my buddy Jack when I spotted them in the distance. The wooden box they threw in the water changed everything I thought I knew about my family. Before I tell you what I found inside that box, let me know where you are watching from and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, this story will make you question everything about the people you love. Growing up in Montana shaped me into the man I am today. The wide open spaces, the mountains in the distance, and the crystal clear rivers flowing through valleys. I followed my father into construction work right after high school. There was something honest about creating something with your hands, about seeing physical proof of your labor at the end of each day. I became pretty good at it too, working my way up to site supervisor for Thompson Construction within a decade. My relationship with my parents was always solid, especially with my dad. Some of my fondest childhood memories were those early mornings when he would wake me before sunrise, pack our fishing gear into his old Ford pickup, and drive us to the Jefferson River. He taught me how to cast a line, how to wait patiently for the fish to bite, and most importantly, how to respect nature. "Take only what you need, Calhoun," he would say, "and always leave the place better than you found it." My mom would pack us sandwiches and thermoses of hot coffee, waving goodbye from the porch of our modest two-story home on the edge of town. That was why their recent behavior had been so confusing. About 3 months ago, I started noticing changes. My normally talkative parents would suddenly go quiet when I entered a room. My father, usually so punctual about our monthly fishing trips, had canceled twice with vague excuses about business matters. My mother, who had always been an open book, now took phone calls in whispered tones, stepping outside when I came near. I might have confronted them sooner, but my own life had fallen apart in spectacular fashion. After 7 years of marriage, my wife Amanda had served me divorce papers, citing emotional distance and irreconcilable differences. The real gut punch came when she fought for full custody of our 6-year-old daughter, Lily, painting me as a workaholic who prioritized job sites over bedtime stories. The judge had awarded Amanda primary custody, leaving me with every other weekend and Wednesday dinners. I had been forced to sell our house, and with nowhere else to go, I moved back to my hometown, renting a small apartment just 15 minutes from my parents. The Jefferson River had always been my sanctuary, the place I went when life got too loud. So when Jack Collins, my best friend since 2nd grade, suggested a fishing trip to clear my head, I jumped at the chance. Jack had stayed in town, married his high school sweetheart, and now ran the local hardware store. He was one of the few people who didn't treat me like I was wearing a sign that said failed marriage around my neck. We had planned to meet at our favorite spot, a quiet bend in the river where the trout seemed particularly abundant. I arrived early, setting up our gear and breathing in the fresh Montana air. The water was flowing steadily, catching the afternoon sunlight in ways that made it shimmer like liquid gold. The tall pines surrounding the area swayed gently in the breeze, their scent mixing with the earthy smell of the riverbank. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Jack. "Cal, man, I am so sorry," he said, his voice harried. "Pipe burst at the Wilson place, and they're completely flooded. I gotta head over with emergency supplies." "Don't worry about it," I assured him, though disappointment settled in my chest. "Rain check for Saturday?" "Absolutely. Beers on me to make up for it." After hanging up, I considered packing up and heading home. But the river looked too inviting, the day too perfect to waste. I decided to stay and fish alone, something I hadn't done since before my marriage. There was a certain peace and solitude that I had forgotten. I had been casting for about an hour when I saw a familiar blue sedan pull into a small clearing about 300 yards downstream. My parents' car. My first instinct was to call out, to walk over and say hello, maybe invite them to join me. But something about the way they parked, partially hidden by trees, away from the usual spots, made me pause. I moved behind a large pine, watching as my father, Thomas Morris, emerged from the driver's side. My mother, Elizabeth, exited the passenger door. They were both dressed oddly for a river visit, my father in dark slacks and a button-up shirt rather than his usual jeans and flannel. My mother in black pants and a navy sweater despite the warm spring day. My father went to the trunk and removed something that made my blood run cold, a wooden crate about the size of a microwave oven, sealed with metal bands. It looked heavy as he strained to carry it. My mother kept looking around nervously, her eyes scanning the tree line. Had she seen me? I pressed closer to the rough bark of the pine, barely breathing. They moved toward the river, my father struggling with the crate, my mother continually checking over her shoulder. When they reached the water's edge, they paused, having what appeared to be an intense conversation. My mother pointed to the middle of the river, where the current was strongest. My father nodded grimly. With a final glance around, my father waded into the river, the water soaking his pants up to his knees. When he was about waist deep, he heaved the crate into the current. The box splashed heavily, bobbing for a moment before the water began pulling it downstream. My parents didn't wait to see where it went. They hurried back to their car, and within minutes, they were gone, leaving only tire tracks in the dirt and ripples in the water. I stood frozen behind that pine tree for what felt like ages, my mind racing to make sense of what I had just witnessed. My parents, the people who had taught me right from wrong, who had lectured me about littering and respecting nature, had just dumped a mysterious crate into the Jefferson River. Nothing about this made sense. The crate was now floating downstream, occasionally hitting rocks and spinning in the current. Before I could second-guess myself, I was moving, abandoning my fishing gear and running along the riverbank to keep the box in sight. The uneven ground made it difficult, roots and rocks threatening to trip me with each hurried step. About a quarter-mile downstream, the river widened and slowed, and the crate became lodged against a fallen tree that stretched partway across the water. This was my chance. I kicked off my boots and waded in, gasping as the cold water bit at my skin. The river bottom was slippery with algae-covered stones, and the current, though slower here, still pushed against my legs with surprising force. As I got closer to the crate, something made my heart stop. A sound, faint, almost imperceptible above the rush of water, but unmistakable. A whimper, then a muffled cry. "Please be empty," I whispered to myself, even as the evidence suggested otherwise. Please just be old clothes or fishing gear. The crate had taken on water and was even heavier than it had looked when my father carried it. I struggled to drag it toward the shore, my jeans and t-shirt now completely soaked. The rough wood scraped against my palms as I pulled, leaving splinters that I was too focused to feel. Once on the rocky bank, I examined the box more closely. It was sturdier than I had initially thought, reinforced with metal bands at the corners and partially sealed with heavy nails. Whatever was inside, my parents had gone to great lengths to contain it. I ran back to my fishing spot and grabbed my tackle box. Inside was a multi-tool with pliers and a small pry bar I sometimes used for removing hooks. Back at the crate, I wedged the tool under the lid and pushed with all my strength. The wood creaked in protest, nails slowly giving way until, with a final crack, the lid came partially free. What I saw inside turned my world upside down. Wrapped in damp blankets, small and fragile, was a baby. A tiny baby girl, no more than a few months old, with a tuft of dark hair and skin that had taken on a frightening bluish tinge. For a moment, I thought I was too late, that the cold water had already taken her life. Then her chest rose with a shallow breath, and her eyes fluttered open briefly before closing again. "Oh my God," I whispered, immediately pulling off my jacket despite my wet clothes. I carefully lifted her from the box, noting the expensive-looking gold bracelet around her tiny wrist and a small pendant with unfamiliar writing. Beneath where she had been lying was a folded paper with text in a language I couldn't identify, possibly Eastern European. I wrapped my jacket around her and held her close to my chest, trying to share what body heat I could. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "I need an ambulance at the Jefferson River, near Stoner's Bend," I told the dispatcher, my voice shaking. "I found a baby in a box in the river. She's alive but barely breathing." "Did you say a baby, sir?" The disbelief in the dispatcher's voice mirrored my own. "Yes, a baby girl. Please hurry." While waiting for help to arrive, I gently rocked the infant, talking to her in soothing tones, though my mind was in chaos. How could my parents do this? Were they trying to kill this child? Where had she come from? The questions swirled like the river current, threatening to pull me under. The baby stirred in my arms, her tiny fingers wrapping around my thumb with surprising strength. It reminded me painfully of Lily at that age, how she would grasp my finger and not let go, as if I was her anchor in the world. The thought of my own daughter made the situation even more incomprehensible. How could anyone, let alone my own parents, attempt to dispose of a child like unwanted trash? I heard sirens in the distance, growing louder as they approached the access road to this part of the river. Relief washed over me. Whatever was happening, whatever my parents' involvement, The important thing now was saving this baby's life. The paramedics arrived first, rushing down the bank with equipment in hand. They took the baby from me with practiced efficiency, immediately checking her vitals and wrapping her in special thermal blankets. "Her pulse is weak but steady," one said to his partner. "Mild hypothermia, possible drugging based on pupil response." They asked me questions I couldn't fully answer. How long had she been in the water? I wasn't sure. Where did she come from? I couldn't say, at least. Not yet. The police arrived minutes later, and the questions became more pointed, more suspicious. I told them I had been fishing and spotted the crate floating by, omitting the part about my parents. It wasn't a complete lie, but the omission felt heavy on my tongue. As they loaded the baby into the ambulance, I watched her tiny form, now attached to monitors and an IV. One of the paramedics turned to me before closing the doors. "You saved her life," he said simply. "A few more minutes in that water." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The police officer, a woman named Martinez according to her badge, asked if I would come to the station to give a full statement. I agreed. Following her patrol car in my truck, the fishing gear hastily thrown in the back, forgotten in the wake of what had happened. As I drove, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel, I kept seeing that image, the baby's blue-tinged skin, the expensive bracelet, my father's grim expression as he threw the crate into the river. None of it made sense, yet all of it pointed to something terrible, something my parents were involved in, something I now couldn't ignore. After giving my statement to the police, carefully avoiding any mention of my parents, I drove to their house on Maple Street, the same house I had grown up in, with its faded blue shutters and wraparound porch where we used to sit on summer evenings, counting fireflies and telling stories. It looked the same as always, peaceful in the fading light of day, betraying nothing of what I had witnessed hours earlier. Their car was in the driveway. I sat in my truck for several minutes, trying to compose myself, trying to find the right words. What do you say to the people who raised you when you suspect them of attempted murder? How do you begin that conversation? Finally, I walked up the familiar path to the front door. I didn't knock. I hadn't knocked since I was a teenager. The door was unlocked, as it always was in our small town where everyone still pretended crime didn't exist. My mother was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked up when I entered, her face brightening with a smile that now seemed foreign to me. "Calhoun, what a nice surprise. Are you staying for dinner? Your father just went to the basement to get some wine." She acted as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't helped dispose of a baby mere hours ago. I studied her familiar features, her graying blonde hair pulled back in its usual practical ponytail, the laugh lines around her eyes that had always made her look kind. Now I wondered what secrets those eyes held. "Mom," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "I need to talk to you and Dad." Something in my tone must have alerted her. The knife paused mid-chop. "Is everything all right, honey? Is it about Lily?" "Thomas," she called toward the basement door. "Calhoun is here. Come up, please." My father appeared moments later, a bottle of red wine in his hand. He looked exactly as he always did, salt and pepper hair neatly combed, reading glasses perched on top of his head, flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbow. Not like a man who had committed a terrible crime that afternoon. "Cal, good to see you, son. Staying for dinner?" He set the wine on the counter and moved to embrace me. I stepped back, avoiding his touch. "I was at the river today," I said without preamble. "I saw you both there." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's knife clattered to the cutting board. My father's expression remained carefully neutral, but his knuckles whitened around the wine bottle. "What are you talking about?" my mother asked, her voice light but strained. "I saw you throw a wooden crate into the river and leave. I know what was inside." My father stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of my mother, in an almost protective stance. "Calhoun, you must be mistaken. We went to the gardening center today, then stopped for lunch in Brookfield. We haven't been near the river." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I almost doubted myself. Almost. "Stop it," I said, my voice rising. "I saw you both clearly. Blue sedan, you in dark pants, Mom in a black outfit. You carried a wooden crate to the middle of the river and dumped it. There was a baby inside. A baby girl." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "A baby? Calhoun, what are you saying? That's a terrible accusation." "It's not an accusation. It's what happened." I pulled her out of the river. The paramedics took her to the hospital. "You need to stop this right now. my father said, his voice taking on an edge I rarely heard. I don't know what you think you saw, but you're clearly confused. Confused? I laughed bitterly. I know what I saw. My own parents trying to drown an infant. What I don't know is why. My mother began to cry, tears streaming down her face as she shook her head repeatedly. This isn't happening. You can't really believe we'd do something so horrible. We were disposing of old fishing equipment, my father said firmly. Some of my gear was damaged beyond repair, rusted hooks that could hurt someone. It was irresponsible to dump it in the river, I admit, and am ashamed you saw that. But this story about a baby is absolutely false. I held her in my arms. I shouted, my composure finally breaking. She was blue from the cold water, wrapped in blankets, wearing a gold bracelet. There was a note in some foreign language. She nearly died. My father's expression hardened. Calhoun, I think your divorce has affected you more than we realized. First you lose partial custody of Lily, and now you're having some sort of episode. Episode? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This isn't about my mental state. You were on antidepressants last year, my mother interjected, wiping her tears. Dr. Simmons was concerned about potential side effects, hallucinations, paranoia. I'm not hallucinating. There are police involved now. The baby is at county hospital. This is real. My father approached me slowly, as if I were a wild animal that might lash out. Son, listen to yourself. You're accusing us, your own parents, of attempted murder. Does that really make sense to you? People who devoted their lives to raising you, who taught you right from wrong. His words hit me like physical blows. Because he was right about one thing, it didn't make sense. The loving parents who had raised me couldn't possibly have done what I saw them do today. But I hadn't imagined it either. I know what I saw, I repeated, but with less conviction. What you need is rest, my mother said soothingly. And maybe to talk to Dr. Simmons again. The stress of the divorce, losing time with Lily. It's a lot for anyone to handle. They were gaslighting me, making me question my own sanity. The worst part was, for a brief moment, it was working. I began to wonder if I had somehow misidentified them, if the stress and loneliness had played tricks on my mind. But then I remembered the baby's tiny fingers curling around my thumb, the paramedic's words, "You saved her life." That was real. Whatever was happening here, whatever web of lies my parents were spinning, the baby was real. This conversation isn't over, I said, backing toward the door. That baby is fighting for her life right now because of what you did, and I'm going to find out why. Calhoun, please, my mother pleaded. Don't leave like this. Stay for dinner. Let's talk this through rationally. There's nothing rational about what happened today, I replied. Nothing at all. I left their house more confused than when I arrived. Their denial had been absolute, convincing even. If I hadn't seen them with my own eyes, I might have believed them. As I drove back to my apartment, questions swirled in my mind. If they were capable of this, what else might they have done that I didn't know about? What other secrets were hidden behind those familiar, trusted faces? I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the baby's face, heard my parents' denials, felt the weight of unwelcome knowledge pressing down on me. By morning, I knew what I had to do. If my parents wouldn't tell me the truth, I would have to find it myself. The baby had been taken to County Hospital, the largest medical facility within 50 miles. I arrived there early the next morning, not entirely sure what I planned to say or do, only knowing I needed to see her again, to confirm that what had happened was real. At the reception desk, I hesitated. What was I supposed to ask? Can I see the baby that was rescued from a river yesterday? Instead, I said I was the one who found the abandoned baby and wanted to check on her condition. To my surprise, this statement got me directed to the third floor, where I was introduced to Detective Sandra Lopez. She was shorter than me by almost a foot, with dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Mr. Morris," she said, extending her hand. "I was hoping to speak with you again. I have some follow-up questions about yesterday." I shook her hand, noticing she had my full statement from the previous day on a tablet in front of her. "How is she? The baby?" Detective Lopez's expression softened slightly. "Stable. The doctors say she was sedated with some kind of mild tranquilizer, which actually might have slowed her metabolism enough to prevent the cold water from killing her. Still, it was close. Can I see her?" She studied me for a moment, then nodded, briefly. "She's in the NICU. The nurses have been calling her River." River, a name born from the circumstances of her rescue. It was fitting in a sad way. The detective led me through secured doors to the neonatal intensive care unit. Inside an incubator, surrounded by monitors and tubes, lay the tiny girl Id pulled from the water. She looked better than yesterday, the bluish tinge gone from her skin, her breathing steady. She was beautiful, with dark curls and long eyelashes that rested against her cheeks. The doctors estimate she's about 3 months old, Detective Lopez said. Healthy apart from the sedation and hypothermia. No identification, of course, though the jewelry she was wearing is expensive, possibly Eastern European craftsmanship. I nodded, remembering the bracelet and pendant. Was there anything else in the box? A note or something? Yes, a handwritten letter in Romanian. We're working on a full translation, but it appears to be from the birth mother, entrusting the child to someone for a better life. There was no addressee, no names mentioned. Romanian. My parents had visited Romania several times over the past decade for what they called heritage tourism. My father had distant relatives there, or so he claimed. Any leads on the parents? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Nothing concrete yet. We're checking missing persons reports, but... She let the sentence hang, and I understood the implication. This might not be a case of a local missing baby. This might be something bigger, something that crossed borders. The strange thing, Detective Lopez continued, is that the box was an unusual choice. Heavy, conspicuous. If someone wanted to kill the child, there are unfortunately more efficient ways. If they wanted to abandon her, there are safe haven laws they could have used. The whole scenario suggests desperation or inexperience. Or a message, I thought. A warning to someone. I watched River sleep, feeling an unexpected connection to her. I had saved her life, and now I felt responsible for her in some undefined way. I needed to know who had put her in that river, and why, even if the answer destroyed my family. Thank you for letting me see her, I told the detective. If there's anything else I can do to help find who did this. Actually, there is. We'd like you to look at some photographs, see if you recognize anyone. She led me to a small conference room and pulled up a series of images on her tablet. They were grainy surveillance photos of various people at gas stations, motels, and convenience stores. These were taken in the last 48 hours within a 20-mile radius of where the baby was found, she explained. Standard procedure in cases like this. I flipped through the images, careful to maintain a neutral expression when I reached one showing my parents at a gas station about 10 miles from the river. They were dressed exactly as I had seen them yesterday. No one looks familiar. I lied, hating myself for it. I needed more information before I could implicate them. I needed to understand. After leaving the hospital, I drove to my parents' house. They were both at work, my father at his construction management job, my mother at the local library where she had been head librarian for 15 years. The spare key was still hidden in the fake rock by the back porch steps. I let myself in, feeling like an intruder in my childhood home. I wasn't sure exactly what I was looking for, but I knew I needed to find something that would explain what I had witnessed. I started with the obvious places: their bedroom, the office, the basement. Nothing seemed out of place or suspicious. Old photo albums showed a normal family history. My birth, school years, fishing trips, graduations. Filing cabinets contained ordinary paperwork, taxes, house deeds, insurance policies. I was about to give up when I remembered my father's workshop in the detached garage. It had always been his private space, where he retreated to work on woodworking projects and store tools. As kids, we were told to stay out unless invited, a rule I had always respected. The garage was unlocked. My father's tools hung in their usual precise arrangement on pegboards. His workbench was clean and organized, nothing unusual except the workbench had always been built against the back wall of the garage. Now it stood about 6 inches away from the wall. I squeezed behind it and found what I was looking for: a seam in the wooden paneling, nearly invisible unless you were specifically looking for it. A hidden compartment. It took some effort, but I managed to slide the panel open. Inside was a metal lockbox. I expected it to be locked, but it opened easily. My father had always been forgetful about keys. The contents made my blood run cold. Passports not in our family name. Bundles of foreign currency, mostly euros, but also Romanian lei. Photographs of babies and young children, each with handwritten numbers on the back. A ledger with dates, initials, and dollar amounts going back 15 years. And most damning of all, a stack of travel itineraries showing regular trips to Eastern Europe, particularly Romania and Moldova. I sat on the dusty garage floor, surrounded by evidence that my parents were involved in something illicit. The obvious conclusion was horrifying human trafficking, specifically babies. But that couldn't be possible. Not my parents. There had to be another explanation. I took photos of everything with my phone, careful to replace items exactly as I had found them. Then I closed the panel and moved the workbench back into position. I needed more evidence, something definitive. I called Jack, asking to meet for that rain check beer. At a noisy bar where we wouldn't be overheard, I shared a partial version of events finding the baby but not my suspicions about my parents. "That's insane, man," Jack said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Who would do something like that?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," I replied. "Did you notice anything unusual around town lately? Any strangers or out-of-place vehicles?" Jack took a long sip of his beer, considering. "Not really, though." He hesitated. "What? It's probably nothing, but I saw your parents at the Pine Grove Motel last week. I was delivering a special order of security locks to the owner, and I noticed their car in the lot. Thought it was weird since, they live like 10 minutes away." The Pine Grove Motel was a rundown place on the edge of town, known more for hourly rates than tourism. Were they alone? No, that's the other weird thing. They were talking to some fancy-looking couple. The woman had this designer purse my wife would kill for, and the guy was wearing what looked like a $1,000 suit. Totally out of place at the Pine Grove. A wealthy couple. The baby's expensive bracelet and pendant. A letter entrusting the child for a better life. The pieces were starting to form a pattern I didn't want to see. "Thanks, Jack. That helps." "Helps with what?" "Cal, what aren't you telling me?" I couldn't bring myself to voice my suspicions. "Not yet. I'll explain everything soon. I promise." The next day, I called in sick to work and parked a block away from my father's office. I had no clear plan, just a desperate need to find answers. When he left for lunch, I followed at a distance in my truck. Instead of heading to his usual diner, my father drove to a storage facility on the outskirts of town. I parked across the street and watched as he unlocked a unit and disappeared inside. 20 minutes later, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up. A man in an expensive suit got out and entered the same unit. I took photos with my phone, using the zoom function to capture clear images of the man's face. 10 minutes later, both men emerged. They shook hands, and my father handed the man a manila envelope. The exchange was quick, businesslike. The man returned to his SUV and drove away. My father stood outside the storage unit for a few minutes, looking troubled. For a moment, I saw vulnerability in his posture, a heaviness that made him look older than his 62 years. Then he straightened up, locked the unit, and returned to his car. I didn't follow him back to work. Instead, I drove straight to the police station and asked for Detective Lopez. "I need to show you something," I said when she appeared. "It might be related to the baby case." In a private room, I shared everything: the photos of the hidden compartment contents, the story Jack had told me, and the images I had just taken of my father meeting the suit-clad stranger. Detective Lopez examined everything carefully, her expression becoming increasingly grave. "Mr. Morris," she said finally, "Calhoun, I need to ask you a difficult question. The people in these photos at the storage facility, do you know who they are?" I took a deep breath. "The older man is Thomas Morris, my father." She didn't look surprised. "I suspected as much from your original statement." The discrepancies were subtle, but there. "What discrepancies?" "You described finding the crate as if you had just happened upon it floating in the river, but the location where emergency services met you was upstream from where such a crate would have naturally drifted in that time frame. You were also evasive about exact times and overly detailed about certain aspects, while vague about others, classic signs of a partial truth." I felt ashamed and relieved simultaneously. I saw them dump the crate. I couldn't believe it was really them. I still can't. Detective Lopez nodded sympathetically. "Family loyalty is powerful, but I need to tell you something. Your parents have been on our radar for a while now, though we never had enough evidence to move forward." "What do you mean, on your radar?" She turned her computer monitor toward me. On the screen was a case file labeled Operation Stork. There were surveillance photos, transcripts, and maps with locations marked across Eastern Europe and the United States. "We believe your parents are part of an international baby trafficking ring," she said bluntly. "They identify desperate mothers in economically depressed regions of Eastern Europe, primarily Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine, and offer to find their babies better homes in America for a fee. Then they sell these babies to wealthy American couples for much larger sums. The room seemed to tilt around me. That can't be right. My parents run charity drives. They volunteer. My mother reads to kids at the library. Their charitable work provides excellent cover for their overseas activities. It also gives them access to information about vulnerable communities. She clicked through more files, showing me evidence that had been gathered over years, a small operation that had grown increasingly sophisticated. The man your father met today is Gregory Pearson, a lawyer who specializes in creative adoptions. He creates false paperwork to make the adoptions appear legal. My mind flashed to the baby, the bracelet, the note in Romanian. But why throw River into? Why try to kill her? We don't think they were trying to kill her. Based on the sedative found in her system, they were transporting her to a handoff location. But something went wrong. Our current theory is that the buyers backed out. Why would they back out? Detective Lopez hesitated. The baby has a heart murmur. Minor, treatable, but some buyers in this market are looking for perfect babies. The coldness of it all made me physically ill. Babies treated as commodities, rejected for the slightest flaw. And my parents facilitating it all. The most disturbing part, she continued, is that our investigation suggests your mother may actually be the primary operator, not your father. My mother? The soft-spoken librarian who had baked cookies for my class and bandaged my scraped knees? She has the organizational skills, the research background, and the community connections. We believe she identifies targets overseas, while your father handles the transportation logistics. I thought about my mother's meticulous nature, her attention to detail, her seemingly innocent interest in genealogy and Eastern European cultures. It had all been a front for something monstrous. What happens now? I asked, my voice hollow. We need your help, Calhoun. We have enough to make arrests, but not enough to dismantle the entire network. With your assistance, we could gather the final pieces of evidence we need. What kind of assistance? We'd like you to wear a wire and confront your parents again. Get them to admit what they've been doing on record. The request felt like a physical blow. Betray my parents? Help send them to prison? But then I thought of River, tiny and vulnerable in her hospital incubator. How many other babies had passed through my parents' hands over the years? How many desperate mothers had been exploited? I'll do it, I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. But I need to know one thing first. Were they always like this? Was my entire childhood a lie? Detective Lopez's expression softened. Based on our timeline, this operation began about 15 years ago. Before that, they appear to have been exactly who you thought they were: ordinary, law-abiding citizens. 15 years ago, around the time my father's construction business had nearly gone bankrupt during the recession, when they had mysteriously recovered financially just as I was heading to college. The money that had helped pay for my education, my first car, my wedding, all of it tainted. When do we do this? I asked. Tomorrow evening. We'll set you up with everything you need. As I left the police station, I felt as though I was walking through a nightmare. The sunny afternoon seemed obscenely cheerful against the darkness that had engulfed my life. My parents weren't just criminals, they were monsters who had trafficked in the most innocent of human lives, and I had to be the one to bring them down. The wire was uncomfortable against my skin, the small microphone taped securely to my chest. Detective Lopez and her team had spent an hour preparing me, showing me how the equipment worked and coaching me on what to say. Keep the conversation natural, she advised. Don't push too hard too fast. Let them incriminate themselves. Easy for her to say. She wasn't about to confront the people who had raised her, loved her, and apparently financed their lives by selling babies. I drove to my parents' house with a heaviness in my chest that made it difficult to breathe. A van with surveillance equipment was parked 2 blocks away, with Detective Lopez and 2 other officers inside, listening to every word. Another team was positioned at the back of the house in case my parents tried to flee. It was Thursday evening. My mother would be making lasagna, as she did every Thursday for as long as I could remember. My father would be having his pre-dinner scotch, reading the newspaper in his recliner. The familiar routine of it made what I was about to do even more painful. I didn't knock. I walked in as I always had, the sun returning home. The smell of tomato sauce and garlic bread filled the house. From the living room, I heard the rustle of my father's newspaper. Thomas? Is that Calhoun? My mother's voice called from the kitchen. My father appeared in the hallway, scotch in hand. Cal, didn't expect to see you after. Well, after last time. We need to talk, I said, My voice steadier than I felt. All of us. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked hesitant, worried. Calhoun, honey, if this is about those wild accusations again. It's about River, I said. That's what they're calling her at the hospital. The baby you threw in the water. My father's face hardened. I thought we made it clear that we had nothing to do with any baby. Stop lying. I hadn't meant to shout, but the anger bubbled up unexpectedly. I know everything. The trafficking ring, the babies from Eastern Europe, the fake adoption papers. I know. My parents exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. My mother stepped closer, her expression concerned but controlled. Calhoun, I think you need help. These delusions. I found your hidden compartment in the garage, I interrupted. The passports, the foreign currency, the ledger with all those initials and amounts. I saw Dad meeting with Gregory Pearson at the storage unit yesterday. I know what you've been doing for the past 15 years. My father's face went pale. He set his scotch down carefully on a side table. You've been spying on us? I've been trying to make sense of what I saw at the river. You don't understand what you've found, my mother said, her voice taking on a strange, hard quality I'd never heard before. The world isn't black and white, Calhoun. Then explain it to me, I challenged. Explain how selling babies is anything but wrong. Another look passed between them, a silent communication born of decades together. My father seemed to deflate, sinking into the nearest chair. But my mother remained standing, her posture suddenly different, more confident, more authoritative. We don't sell babies, she said coldly. We create better lives for children who would otherwise grow up in poverty, disease, and neglect. By trafficking them, by placing them with families who can give them everything. Families who have been waiting years to have a child, who have wealth and resources and love to give. For a price, I added bitterly. My father looked up. The money ensures commitment. People value what they pay for. And what about River? What happened there? She wasn't valuable enough because of her heart murmur. My mother's eyes narrowed. That was unfortunate. The Andersons backed out at the last minute, said they wanted a perfect baby after paying so much. We had nowhere to take her. So you decided to drown her instead? No. My father looked genuinely horrified. The box was designed to float. It would have been spotted downstream at the bridge. There's always someone fishing there. You left her survival to chance? She nearly died. It was a calculated risk, my mother said, her voice eerily calm. We've never had a return before. There was no protocol. I stared at her, not recognizing the woman before me. This calculating, cold individual was not the mother who had kissed my scraped knees and cheered at my baseball games. How many? I asked. How many babies have you sold? Placed. My mother corrected automatically. 43 over 15 years. The number stunned me into silence. 43 lives bought and sold like commodities. 43 mothers who had given up their children, believing they were securing them a better future. How did it start? How did you become this? My father rubbed his face wearily. It was after the recession. We were going to lose everything, the house, the business, your college fund. Then Elizabeth met a woman during one of her library exchange programs in Bucharest. She had connections, my mother continued, taking up the story. She knew families desperate enough to consider alternatives. And I knew from my charity work that there were plenty of wealthy Americans looking to circumvent the traditional adoption process. It was supposed to be a one-time thing, my father added, just to get us back on our feet. But then, the money was good, my mother finished. And we told ourselves we were doing a service, helping both sides get what they wanted. I thought of the times they had traveled to Eastern Europe over the years, always bringing back souvenirs and stories of the amazing people they had met, all a cover for their real activities. Those trips you took, you were shopping for babies. We were identifying candidates, my mother corrected, as if the terminology made it less horrific. Most of these children would have ended up in overcrowded orphanages or worse. We gave them opportunities they never would have had, by stealing them from their mothers. We didn't steal anyone, she snapped. These women were compensated. They made a choice driven by poverty and desperation. And the American families, do they know where these babies really come from? They know not to ask too many questions, my father said quietly. They get the child they want, with paperwork that appears legitimate. Everyone wins. Except for babies like River, who get thrown away when they're not perfect enough. The anger in my voice was palpable now. How do you sleep at night knowing what you've done? My mother's expression softened slightly. a glimpse of the woman I thought I knew. We've given dozens of children better lives than they ever could have had. The money has put countless others through school, provided medicine, improved whole communities. If that's evil, then so be it. And River? What about her? A miscalculation, my mother admitted. In 15 years, she's the only one who didn't go according to plan. Because you got caught, I said bitterly. A sudden realization seemed to dawn on my mother's face. Her eyes narrowed as she looked me up and down. You're wearing a wire, aren't you? She didn't wait for my answer. Thomas, check him. My father hesitated, looking between us with conflicted eyes. Elizabeth, check him, she ordered. Before either of them could move, the front door burst open. Detective Lopez and 4 officers rushed in, weapons drawn. Thomas and Elizabeth Morris, the detective announced. You're under arrest for child trafficking, kidnapping, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit fraud. My mother didn't resist as an officer handcuffed her. She just looked at me with eyes that held both anger and a strange sort of pride. You always were too much like me, she said quietly. Thorough, determined. I should have seen this coming. My father seemed to collapse in on himself as he was handcuffed, suddenly looking every day of his 62 years and more. I'm sorry, Cal, he whispered as they led him past me. I never wanted any of this. I just didn't know how to stop her once it started. I watched in stunned silence as my parents were led to separate police cars. Neighbors had begun to gather on the street, pointing and whispering. Our family's private nightmare was now public spectacle. Detective Lopez stayed behind as the other officers secured the house as a crime scene. You did well, she told me. We got everything we needed and more. Their contacts, their methods, their financial arrangements. With this evidence, we can dismantle the entire network. I should have felt relief, maybe even pride at helping bring criminals to justice. Instead, I felt hollow, as if something essential had been carved out of me. What happens now? I asked. Now we follow the evidence. Based on their statements, we'll identify other traffickers, the lawyer who falsified documents, the wealthy buyers. It's going to be a very extensive case. I nodded mechanically. And River? She'll remain in protective custody until we can determine if she has any legitimate family in Romania. If not, she'll enter the foster system. The foster system. After all she had endured, she would face yet another uncertain future. The unfairness of it twisted in my gut. As I left my childhood home for what I knew would be the last time, I looked back at the porch where I had played, the yard where I had learned to catch a baseball, the windows behind which a family that never really existed had lived. Everything I had believed about my life, my history, my parents, had been built on a foundation of lies. But amid the wreckage of those lies, one truth remained clear. The tiny girl fighting for her life in the hospital deserved better than the hand fate had dealt her. And perhaps in helping her, I could begin to atone for the sins my family had committed. 6 months after my parents' arrest, I sat in the courtroom as the judge delivered their sentences. My father received 15 years for his role in the trafficking ring, with the possibility of parole after 8. My mother, identified as the mastermind of the operation, received 25 years with no possibility of parole before 18 years served. They had both pleaded guilty as part of a deal to avoid trial and to reduce their sentences by providing information about their network. The investigation had expanded far beyond what anyone initially imagined. 27 babies had been identified, and their adoptive families investigated. 12 couples were charged as knowing participants in illegal adoptions. Gregory Pearson, the lawyer, was sentenced to 20 years for his role in falsifying documents. 3 other trafficking rings connected to my parents' operation were exposed across the country. The press called it the River Baby case, and for weeks, my family's crimes were headline news. I changed my phone number, considered changing my name, and threw myself into therapy sessions twice a week with Dr. Keller, a trauma specialist. You're not responsible for their actions, she reminded me in each session. Their choices were not your choices. Intellectually, I knew she was right. But emotionally, the guilt lingered. The money that had paid for my education, my first car, my wedding, all of it tainted by the suffering of desperate mothers and trafficked babies. I sold my parents' house as soon as I was legally able to do so and donated every penny to organizations fighting human trafficking and supporting orphanages in Eastern Europe. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to rebuild my life from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The construction company where I worked kept me on, despite the notoriety. My coworkers were awkward around me at first, but eventually, the sideways glances and hushed conversations when I entered the room faded. My relationship with Amanda, my ex-wife, shifted in unexpected ways. The publicity of the case had initially horrified her, but as the truth emerged that I had helped bring my own parents to justice, her attitude softened. That took courage, she told me during a handoff of our daughter Lily, standing up for what's right, even when it hurt. 4 months after my parents' sentencing, Amanda agreed to revise our custody arrangement. Instead of every other weekend, I now had Lily every weekend and 2 weeknights. It was more time than I'd had with my daughter since the divorce, and I treasured every moment. But amid the slow healing of my own life, I couldn't forget River. The baby I had pulled from the water had become a symbol to me of both the horror my parents had perpetrated and the possibility of redemption. I visited her regularly at the foster home where she had been placed after leaving the hospital. Each time, she seemed bigger, stronger, her dark eyes tracking movements, her tiny hands reaching to grab my fingers or my shirt. "She likes you," Mrs. Gonzalez, her foster mother, observed during one visit. "She always gets excited when you come." I watched River playing on a colorful mat, batting at hanging toys with remarkable coordination for a 9-month-old. Her heart condition had been treated successfully with medication, and doctors were optimistic she would lead a normal, healthy life. "Any word on her permanent placement?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mrs. Gonzalez shook her head. "The Romanian authorities haven't located any family, and with the investigation still ongoing, adoption proceedings are complicated." As I drove home that day, an idea that had been forming in my mind for months crystallized into a decision. The next morning, I contacted the Department of Children and Family Services and asked what would be required for me to become River's foster parent, with the eventual goal of adoption. The social worker was skeptical at first. "Mr. Morris, given your family's involvement in her case, I'm not my parents," I said firmly. "I'm the one who saved her life. I've visited her consistently since she was found. I have a stable job, a home, and I've been cleared of any involvement in my parents' crimes." It wasn't an easy process. There were background checks, home studies, interviews with my therapist, character references from friends and colleagues. My relationship with Lily was scrutinized to ensure I was a capable parent. The investigation into my finances confirmed that I had donated all proceeds from my parents' assets. 4 months of paperwork, interviews, and nervous waiting later, I was approved as River's foster parent. The day I brought her home to my newly baby-proofed apartment was both terrifying and exhilarating. "This is your home now," I told her as I carried her through the front door. She looked around with curious eyes, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. "It's not much, but we'll make it work." River's presence transformed my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. My days revolved around feedings, diaper changes, and the simple joy of watching her discover the world. When Lily visited, she was initially hesitant around the baby, but soon appointed herself River's official protector and play supervisor. "She's kind of like my sister, right?" Lily asked one evening as she helped me give River a bath. "In a way," I agreed. "Family isn't always about who you're related to by blood. Sometimes it's about who you choose to love and care for." 1 year after my parents' arrest, I received a letter from my father in prison. It was the first contact I had with either of them since their sentencing. I let it sit unopened on my kitchen counter for 3 days before finding the courage to read it. "Cal," he had written in his familiar, neat handwriting, "I don't expect forgiveness. What we did, what I allowed to happen, was unforgivable. But I want you to know that I think about that baby every day, the one you saved. In saving her, you saved a part of your mother and me too. You did what I never had the courage to do, stand up for what's right. I'm proud of you for that. Whatever you decide to do with your life from here, know that at least one good thing came from our family's dark legacy. You became the man I should have been." I visited him once after that, leaving River and Lily with Jack and his wife for the afternoon. The prison visiting room was stark and institutional, nothing like the warm home where I had grown up. My father looked older, diminished in his prison uniform, his shoulders hunched as if carrying a physical weight. "You look good, Cal," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm doing okay." We sat in awkward silence for a few moments. "I heard you're trying to adopt her," he said finally. "The baby from the river." I nodded. "Her name is River." That's good. She deserves someone who'll love her." "Have you heard from Mom?" I asked, changing the subject. He shook his head. "She doesn't want to see me. says I betrayed her by cooperating so fully with the investigation. Are you sorry? Not for getting caught, but for what you did? All those babies, all those families. My father stared down at his hands. Every day, every minute. But your mother. He hesitated. Elizabeth still believes she was helping them, giving them better lives. I thought about my mother, the woman who had read me bedtime stories and taught me to bake cookies, who had also orchestrated the buying and selling of babies for profit. The complexity of human nature that allowed someone to compartmentalize so completely, to be both loving and monstrous. I won't be coming back, I told my father. This isn't about punishment. I just need to focus on building something new, something untainted by the past. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I understand. You take care of that little girl and yourself. As I left the prison that day, I felt a strange sense of closure. Not forgiveness. I didn't think I would ever reach that point, but a kind of acceptance. My parents had made their choices. Now, I was making mine. 2 years after finding River in that wooden crate, the adoption became final. The investigation had concluded. The Romanian authorities had confirmed she had no known relatives, and the judge determined that my home was where she belonged. Lily was there for the court ceremony, proudly holding her new sister's hand as we took photos afterward. River was now nearly 3 years old, a laughing, curious toddler who showed no signs of her traumatic beginnings. Her heart condition was well managed, and doctors were optimistic it might resolve completely as she grew older. She called me Daddy and Lily Sissy, and the sound of those words healed parts of me I hadn't realized were broken. We often went fishing together, all 3 of us, at a different spot on the Jefferson River, far from where I had found River. I was reclaiming the river, transforming it from a place of trauma to one of healing and new memories. Lily was becoming a skilled angler, while River was content to splash in the shallow areas and collect interesting pebbles. Take only what you need, I told them both, echoing my father's words from long ago, and leave the place better than you found it. But the lesson now carried a deeper meaning, understanding that our actions affect others in ways we might not immediately see, that responsibility extends beyond our immediate circle, that courage sometimes means standing up against those we love when they're wrong. I know that someday, when River is old enough, I will have to tell her the truth about how she came to be my daughter. It won't be an easy conversation, but I believe in honesty, even when it's painful. I'll tell her that family isn't defined by the circumstances of our beginning, but by the choices we make and the love we share along the way. The wooden crate that nearly became River's coffin now rests in the evidence lockup at the police station. But sometimes, when I look at my daughter's smile, I think about how close she came to never having a chance at life, and how saving her also saved me. In the midst of the darkest revelation of my life, I found an unexpected light. I used to believe that we were defined by the family we were born into, by the blood that flows in our veins and the legacies we inherit. Now I know that we are defined by our choices, by the courage to confront difficult truths, and by our capacity to build something beautiful from the ashes of destruction. What would you have done in my place? Would you have turned in your own parents, or looked the other way? I hope you never have to face such a choice. But if you enjoyed this true story, please subscribe to hear more stories of life's difficult moments and the healing that can come afterward. Leave a comment below sharing a time when you had to make a difficult choice between family loyalty and doing what was right. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the most powerful act of love is standing up for truth, even when it breaks your heart.